Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. We do begin this morning with former Salt Lake City Mayor Rocky Anderson, here to discuss a party you may have never even heard about. Rocky, welcome back to the show. Good to have you.
Great to be here with you, Glenn. Thank you.
Justice Party, I've seen you talking a lot about it lately. That's why I wanted to bring you on the show. Tell us what it's all about.
Well, the Justice Party is very unique. We're not really an electoral party per se, like the Green Party or the Libertarian Party. You'll never see the Justice Party continue to run in battleground states and what they call spoil the race. That is, split the votes so the very worst candidate ends up getting elected. We are about grassroots activism across the board. And almost every issue that we work so hard on, whether it's universal health care, campaign finance reform, cleaning up the corruption in our financial system, so many things that the American people generally, the majority of them, agree upon, but we've been deprived of by the two major parties. And I must add to that student debt, which has gotten totally out of hand in this country. And it's because of not only the Republicans, but Democrats like Joe Biden, who pushed in 2005 for the financial institutions the non-dischargeability and bankruptcy of student loan obligations.
The party has some unique attributions that I want to dive into. One of those being, when people join this party or this movement, you don't expect them to push aside their previous political affiliations.
That's absolutely.
That's interesting. Talk about why.
Well, because politics shouldn't be an us and them kind of thing. It shouldn't be like a team sport where you're going to stand by your team regardless. I mean, look at all these Republicans that are just holding their noses at how it's become the MAGA party. And it's changed entirely from the Republican Party that my parents belonged to, and when I used to argue politics with my father. So we tell people, you can join the Justice Party if you believe in what we stand for, which the majority of people in this country do, and if you want to keep pushing the major parties, you want to keep pushing for the kind of government that the majority of people in this country want. There is such an enormous gap between what the majority of people in the United States want of all party affiliations or no affiliation at all, and what we're getting from these two major parties. And the only way that we've seen major social progress in this country is not by electing the supposedly right people, but by people without partisanship dividing them, coming together at a grassroots level and pushing relentlessly. That's how we saw the anti-slavery movement, the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the early environmental movement. That's how we saw so many great things come about in this country, because people at the grassroots level cared, and they let our elected officials know we're not going to stop until we see these kinds of changes.
Okay, a couple things here I want to dig into. One, arguing politics with your father. You know that's against the cardinal rule.
We thought it was just a rite of growing up. I had the greatest dad in the world. We had healthy political discussions, and I think it's where I learned to be able to still really care for and like, in my father's case, really love the other person, even though we might have differences about political issues. And I must say, in his later years, I saw him become what I thought was a lot wiser when he realized that our involvements in, say, Central America in the 80s, and even before that, the war in Vietnam, that they were absolutely the wrong way to go. He was not one of these Republican, regardless of what they stand for or what they're doing kind of person.
Well, I'm glad that was healthy, because we all know too well these days you can even divide families when it comes to politics. A second thing, you've talked about some of these issues that you advocate for as a party, but do you shy away from some of the more controversial ones?
No, we don't.
Okay, explain some of the more controversial issues.
Well, I think one of the more controversial issues right now is probably the issue of choice. The fact is, 2/3 of the people in this country believe that women, working with their doctors, and hopefully whoever else that they care and love for and who are there to support them, that they can make the choice within reason, certainly during the first trimester, about abortion. 2/3 of this country support that. So what the Supreme Court's doing, they're just saying it's not there in the Constitution. Now it's time for all of us at the grassroots level, regardless of political affiliations or no affiliation at all, that we come together and we push for the right kinds of legislative changes.
That brings up a really good point, because then when you start to talk about it that way, you know, it is the way it is right now with the Supreme Court. And when you start to look at chipping away at that, it seems like an overwhelming and daunting task. So how do you, as a grassroots effort, really make effective change in the United States when it comes to politics?
Well, our view is that our nation is both a constitutional republic, but to get there, we are also a democracy. The people's will, that's in the preamble of our Constitution, we the people. It's from the people, and that's also in the Utah State Constitution. All the power of government comes from the people. And it doesn't mean we're going to vote on every issue, but when we push as a people, just look at the civil rights movement, look at the LGBTQ plus movement in this country and the great changes that have come about in a relatively short period of time. It really works when we come together and exercise our democracy to push for changes. And that's when the politicians listen. I read a great statement in a book called God's Politics, written by a minister. And he talks about all these guys go back to Washington, they stick their finger in their mouths and hold them up to see where the political winds are blowing. And he says that we're not going to get anywhere by trying to elect the right kind of wet-fingered politician. We together need to be the wind. We need to be determining where those political winds are blowing, so they will have to eventually relent to what the people want. And it's especially important when we see the enormously corrupting influence of money in our system. Everybody knows that drugs, pharmaceutical drugs in this country, are more expensive than anywhere else in the world because of the corrupting influence of money. The same thing with the lack of health care access for millions of people.
Okay, we have about a minute left. I want to get into one thing real quick. This is not a certified, registered party in the state of Utah or anywhere in the United States right now, but could that potentially change?
Absolutely. We were in 2012. In fact, I was on the ballot for the presidential election in about a dozen states. I was also the nominee for the Progressive Party in the several up in Oregon, several parties around the country that already had ballot access. But again, being on the ballot, and we do want to do that because election time is a good time to get the word out about where these parties stand, and especially to address issues that neither of the major parties will address. I mean, think about it. Both major parties are feeding at the same trough of corrupting money and are not talking about campaign finance reform.
Okay, real quick, Rocky, we've run out of time. I wish we had more, but if someone listening is interested in learning more, what should they do?
Please take a look at, it's real easy to remember, www.justiceparty.us. You can be a member of the Justice Party and still stay a member of any other party. You will not be supporting a third party that's going to spoil races, and it doesn't cost you anything, although we can certainly use some financial help because all of this does take money. I'm doing it on a full-time basis as a volunteer without any pay at all. And there are costs getting the word out on social media, and we've got one paid staff person. So we welcome everybody to this grassroots movement for democratic changes in our government.
All right, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Glenn.
Still to come, President Biden